Welcome back. Now, before we get into the local indices, let's get onto our market update. In the Far East is where we begin, where the Asian markets mostly reversed early losses on Wednesday. Investors do, however, remain nervous as the possibility of a US-EU trade war shifted into focus. That's particularly after Washington's tariff threat came in yesterday, while they were also spooked by Brexit uncertainty. Now, the warning from the United States President Donald Trump's administration that it would impose levies of more than $11 billion of European imports jolted investors who had been enjoying what was a positive run of late thanks to optimism over that China-US trade talk. Asia, however, down at close, but certainly off their weakest levels then. As you can tell, the Nikkei going down there on 0.5%, inching into the red at 30,109 points as well. For the Hang Seng is where things went on that front. The Shanghai Composite was the only counter, however, in the black on the day, closing out at 3,241 points. Over into the United States, and trade-sensitive industrials began to drag Wall Street lower on Tuesday as U.S. President Donald Trump said he would impose tariffs of $11 billion on European goods, and as the International Monetary Fund also then lowered its global growth outlook. Now, the Dow Jones Industrial fell almost 0.75%. That's to 26,150 points. The 500 largest companies also lost 0.6%, with the S&P 500 ending the day at 2,878 points, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite was 0.5% weaker, 7,909 points. General market sentiment has returned to some sense of positivity on the local front. As you can see, even the European markets also headed quite high on that front there. The FTSE 100 out in London doing much better. The DAX as well in Germany going up, with the CAC 40 as well following suit. So the market's generally seeing some sense of positivity returning to that sector, well, their markets as well. So let's unpack those numbers a little bit more, and we'll get into the gist of it in just a moment. All right, so you've seen that Rand picture. Surprisingly, that's going up to around 13 Rand 98 odd against the US dollar. So let's chat to Michael Traherne about that and a whole lot more. Now at 13 Rand 96 against the US dollar. Michael, thank you so much for the time, bud. It's been a long time coming, I suppose. Is it Rand strength? Is it dollar strength? Is dollar weakness, should I say? What is it that's moved the Rand into such better territory?
Yeah, I think it's very much a dollar story as opposed to a Rand story. I think global markets are very much on a risk-on type of appetite at the moment. The last 2 weeks, we've seen more green than red across global markets. And that means money flows into your riskier assets, and South Africa would be considered a riskier asset. So more money flowing into South Africa. Good news for the Rand. Money flowing out of the US means that the US dollar weakens, and that's the general story. Yeah. US Fed minutes coming out this afternoon, though, and that'll have a very big impact on where the dollar goes for the next week. Yeah,
and I mean, the sentiment around those minutes as well then is that even though it was a hold with regards to the decision on interest rates there, where exactly they see themselves with regards to the growth, inflation as well, all of those could signify exactly what they do with those interest rates, right? And that certainly will move the needle then when it comes to South Africa's currency.
Yeah, so at the moment, the expectation is lower interest rates for a longer period of time. What people will be specifically looking at is where was the breakdown inside the Fed, who thinks that lower for longer works, who thinks that they should be raising interest rates sooner rather than later, and where's the power balance. And that'll give you an indication of what the markets expect for the next year to 2 years with regards to US interest rates. And US interest rates are really the benchmark interest rate globally. So depending on what the US is doing, central banks around the world generally follow suit at some level. So that's a very, very big impact on global currencies.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's turn our attention to the local front, and on the equity news front, we've certainly seen some news now come out finally after what has been a more quiet time. Sibanye Gold as well managing to raise what is nearly 1.7 billion Rand odd as well in a share placement there. But that share price still going down on the day. So investors not perhaps convinced by this?
Yes, I think there's two factors involved. If you have a look at the other platinum and mining companies today, they're also all down, but not down as much as Sibanye is down. Basically, the company going to shareholders and saying, guys, we need to raise 1.7 billion. We're going to give you shares for that. And that basically dilutes the current shareholders by about 5%. And that's the reason that you're seeing the share price to go down, because as a current shareholder, you have access to 5% less of the profits. So not good news on that front. Part of the announcement yesterday was a production update saying that they've only produced 36% of the gold production this year that they did last year. And it's showing that the prolonged strike from UMCU is not good for the company, not good for the workers. And it's also not a good advert for South Africa from a global mining perspective. It's saying, look, guys, this company needs to raise cash so that it can keep its doors open during a prolonged strike. And at the same time, production is down. So not good overall. But hopefully this matter can be resolved soon.
Are we turning bearish on Sibanye? It was very, I know quite a few people had become very bullish on it, just purely because it had, multiple plays and wasn't just in the gold sector. But things are getting difficult now.
Yeah, I think the reason you buy Sibanye today is for its platinum and palladium assets. Their Stillwater assets in the US is very big, is mostly a palladium producer as opposed to a platinum producer. Palladium prices are at record highs, almost double the price of what platinum is at the moment. So that's very healthy and that's very strong. And that part of the business is actually carrying the gold side of the business now. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them moving away from gold over the long run. Those mines that they're operating, bringing their life of mine forward, trying to get all the good gold out of it and then just shutting it down and moving on to better prospects. I think that's probably in the future for the company, but still very much a platinum palladium price play. And if you think platinum at $900 is too cheap, I think Sibanye is a good buy.
Okay, then what about Nissan? It seems to be investing in creating or putting the Navara out here in South Africa and producing it from here out in Pretoria as well. What does that say about the investment drive that the president went through last year, and what does that actually do for confidence across the corporate space?
Yeah, putting 3 billion investment in South Africa is definitely a statement globally. Government's basically gone out and saying, hey, global companies will give you good tax rates if you open up manufacturing here. And obviously, if you put money into the country to build a manufacturing plant, it's not for 1 or 2 years. You're looking at 10, 20 years. So this is a nice long-term investment from the company. Directly, it will raise 400 jobs, and that's something that we desperately need. But I think overall, it's just a positive message that it's sending. And hopefully with the run-up to the elections, this sort of coverage doesn't get diluted by political hysteria that's going on around us.
And that political hysteria is the same reason that the IMF decided yesterday to cut the growth forecast for South Africa, the growth outlook, 1.2%. Is that still optimistic, or is that perhaps par?
Yeah, I think growing around 1.2% is probably where South Africa's set for 2019. Unfortunately, 2020 is more disappointing where they cut that growth as well. The hope is that after the elections that all the political voices will tone down and we'll all get into one line to grow the country. And I think that's where we need to focus on. But I think the IMF didn't only cut our growth, they cut global growth as well. And it shows you trade wars at the moment, populist policies from governments is more isolatory, and that means that global growth suffers as a whole, and then the global population suffers. So still not bad growth numbers, but not growing as quickly as we'd like to.
Yeah. Michael, appreciate your time this afternoon, but $71 a barrel there for the price of Brent crude, the FTSE, the JSE rather, 0.8% to the good. So much appreciated indeed there. That's Michael Traherne from Vestac Asset Management. If we move on over to that currency board, as I noted a little bit earlier on, so this is a really great figure for this year. Of course, we did trade well below that 14 Rand against the US dollar mark for quite some time earlier this year, but it seems that things developed outside of South Africa's own political will as well. Of course, having seen a stronger set of numbers coming out of the United States. But now Citibank also saying that they fear, however, that things in the S&P 500 in the United States may perhaps reach a turning point this year, and it may even top out. And you never know, that could certainly hurt markets across the board, indeed hurting the South African rand against not just the US dollar, but across the board there with the British pound. A better figure when it comes to the British pound as well, but performing only at 18 Rand 27 against that quid and 15 Rand 74 for a euro. All the marks that we will certainly look out for. We'll continue to check in on those markets, and of course more news coming up right after the short break. Do stay tuned to Market Sense. This is On Point.